This is the holy grail of OBS trucks. A regular cab, short bed, V8, rear-wheel drive Chevrolet 1500. And it's been lowered, completely defeating its utilitarian purpose as a truck. Looking to tow something? Not at this ride height. Hauling? Nothing more than a few hundred pounds in the bed on the suspension. But at least it's fast, right? Not a bit. And it's got to handle great too, being so light. Not even close. But does it look cool? Goddamn right it does. This is a 1989 Chevrolet C1500 base. From 1988 to 2000, this was a full-size half-ton pickup. For perspective, this single-cab, short-bed truck has a 194-inch length and when stock had a height of 70 inches. A 2022 Honda Civic has a 184-inch wheelbase and 56-inch height. The shortest 2022 F-150 you can get today has a length of 209 inches and a height of 77 inches. That's 15 inches longer and 7 inches higher. But really, how often do you see a regular cab, short bed truck today? Nearly all are double cabs, and the shortest double cab F-150 you can get is 232 inches, over 3 feet longer than this 1500. I'm not going to throw shade at modern trucks. It's just highlighting the striking contrast between modern half-ton trucks and the ones from 35 years ago. And in highlighting more differences, driving this 1989 truck is closer to driving an advanced design Chevy truck from the 50s than it is a modern-day Silverado. This truck is loud. It rattles, it creaks, you can feel and smell the heat from the log-style exhaust manifolds and single exhaust pipe radiating through the cab floor. Driving over rough roads feels more like you're along for the ride than controlling it. Cruising at 55 miles per hour feels like 90. There are around 10 switches in the entire truck, and nearly everything is analog or mechanical, including the gauges. Still utilitarian, yet far more refined than the third-generation CK series that preceded it, this truck is the fourth and final generation of the CK series, which sold in droves. The Chevrolet CK series began in 1960 and was in production through 4 generations until 2000. Chevrolet didn't adopt the Silverado and Sierra trim levels as nameplates for those trucks until 2001. Up until then, Chevrolet and GM trucks were known as the CK series, a C denoting the two-wheel drive model and K denoting four-wheel drive models. The suffix 10, or 1500 for the fourth generation, meant the truck was a half-ton model, 20, or 2500, was the 3/4 ton, and 30, or 3500, was the 1 ton. Of course, these model numbers are still used today in Silverados and Sierras to denote the truck's size. Starting production for the 1988 model, the C1500 was built around GM's new GMT 400 platform. If you're thinking this truck looks strikingly similar to the square-body S10s of the era, you're spot on. GM engineers modeled the 4th generation C1500 on the already existing S10s of the era. And something curious about this generation of truck. From 1988 to 1991, you could still purchase a brand new 3rd generation C10. I've often heard GMC produce the 3rd and 4th generations simultaneously because the 4th generation was feared to be, quote, too radical for the market, and GM was afraid it would cut into market share. But I think it's far more likely that it was more cost-effective and would result in less downtime if GM slowly converted its production lines from the 3rd to 4th generation. In 1999 and 2000, the same thing happened. You could buy a 4th generation truck, or the newer generation Silverado or Sierra. When the C8 Corvette was released, there's a lot of speculation that it would be sold alongside a lightly facelift C7 front-engine Corvette, because Corvette diehards, aka the boomers, let's be real, would revolt at the idea of a mid-engine Vette. And a mid-engine Vette would be far too expensive to sell to the normal Vette buyer. After the mid-engine was released with its $60,000 price tag, and good luck finding one at that, GM explained that it never considered manufacturing both generations at the same time. The only car company I know that does this today is Ram. Ram sells the Ram Classic and the successor generation side by side. I suspect Ram found demand high enough to warrant continuing the old generation rather than converting over its existing production lines. If anyone worked at the Big Three when model crossovers were a thing, or knows why Ram actually does this, I'd love to hear from you in the comments. So with that brand new GMT 400 platform, how does the 1500 handle? I think an analogy is best. When you were a kid, did you ever go on those bumper boat rides at the fair? In retrospect, those seem like a huge liability, given the pool of water and electric powered boats slamming into each other, all powered by metal rods scraping against an electrified roof. Do you remember how there was always a delay between you turning the wheel and the boat actually moving? It'd go where you pointed it, but the boat had to think about it for a second. That's what it's like to drive an OBS. And by the way, OBS is a term for these trucks standing for old body style. The steering gears in OBS trucks are notorious for having a ton of slop. Yeah, you can adjust the lash of the steering gear and tighten it up substantially, but it's going to get sloppy again. And then you can adjust it again, and it'll be sloppy again. After driving modern unibody cars or trucks made with high-strength steel frames and sound-deadening material, you tend to forget how damn loud cars from the 90s and 80s were. This truck wasn't meant to be a family hauler with a bed for your kids' hockey equipment. It was meant to be driven hard by working, I say that tongue-in-cheek, with tools and rebar and empty tallboys rolling around in the bed. This thing sounds like it's rattling apart driving down a 35-mile-per-hour road. And that's with everything being brand new, from the suspension to the door seals. Ride quality just wasn't a priority for truck manufacturers in the 80s and 90s. Capabilities, numbers, and toughness were what mattered, constantly one-upping the competitor. And this is something we see continue today with the truck wars, especially over the last few years with Dodge, Chevy, and Ford constantly increasing torque, horsepower, and towing figures to outdo the trucks of the competition. So let's talk more about this particular truck. This is a 1989 C1500 base. It's an Arizona truck owned by a Phoenix school district as a maintenance vehicle for almost 3 decades. It was bought by a car restorer in Arizona who painted it this lovely shade of metallic blue, which is actually not one of the 10 available colors, but it's pretty close to a color you've probably seen called smoke blue metallic. This truck has no accidents despite having over 200,000 miles. The body is aero straight, as the previous owner did a complete frame-off restoration, and it's one of the nicest paint jobs I've seen. It wouldn't be out of place on the floor of Autorama, and that's coming from someone who worked in a custom shop. As for modifications, I'm not going to detail all the new rubber, hoses, seals, lights, grille, body molding, and things of that sort. This truck has been lowered 6 inches in the front and 4 inches in the rear via lowering spindles, springs, a flip kit, and a C-notch. Handling isn't the best, but it's not to the point where you feel unsafe driving it. But going over railroad tracks, oh man, this sucker flexes. Probably due to the C-notch, which, although done correctly, definitely compromises the structural rigidity of the frame. The interior had an LMC truck overhaul with a new seat cover, headliners, door panels, and carpet. We've got a Bluetooth radio in the dash and 3 analog gauges. Around the truck we have 18-inch American racing rims with a square setup. Now for the drivetrain. This is a 2-wheel drive truck and it's powered by the ubiquitous 350 small block V8. The Gen 1 L05's output was a measly 210 horsepower and 300 pound-feet of torque. This engine had the throttle body injection, basically a fuel injector and carburetor hybrid, with the Vortec 350 not coming to market for another 7 years. Backing the mouse motor is a 700 R4, also known as the Turbo Hydromatic, bulletproof and reliable as can be, but not the quickest shifting slush box in the world. Later, the 700R4 would gain electronics and morph into the 4L60E. Over its lifetime, the CK was available with a 5-speed manual and various engines, a 4.6-liter V6, a 5-liter V8, a 7.4-liter V8, and even an 8.1-liter V8 in 2002, albeit that was for an HD model. There were even 3 diesel engines available, anemic Detroit diesels that produced horsepower in the low to mid 100s and torque in the mid to high 200s until 1995. The LH6 naturally aspirated oil burner made only 126 horsepower and 240 pound-feet of torque when the CK came out in 1988. In my view, the C1500 is one of the best options if you want to get into hot rodding. They're relatively cheap. This truck cost around $13,000, and that's including new rims and tires and a tune-up. You can expect to spend upwards of $10,000 for a show-quality CK truck, but you can still pick up clean versions for $5,000 to $7,000. OBS trucks are a deal to get into hot rodding simply because of the massive aftermarket support. Without exaggeration, you can purchase every part to build one of these trucks from suppliers like LMC Truck. If you wanted to, you could build a brand new one from the frame rails up just from LMC's catalog. And if you want to save some money, OBS parts are plentiful in junkyards for now, and it's got a mouse motor in it. A long block can be picked up for under $500 at most junkyards. There's something special about driving an OBS truck. Its analog ride transports you back to the 90s, a time before Bluetooth text notifications, blindside radar, and anonymous braking. It requires input from the driver. There's no safety nets or driver assistance. And that's not to say I'm reluctant to change. Of course, my daily drivers are brand new vehicles with all the bells and whistles available, and I'm looking forward to purchasing my first electric car soon. But it's nice to be transported back to a time less complicated, even if only for a few moments, in a C1500.